Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. Today, we'll be looking at the Legacies of the Age of Darkness PDF that Games Workshop has promised from the start of this new edition. This document contains rules for the many units that were dropped, chiefly for not having miniatures, from the Heresy rule set when the second edition came out. The intent is that players can still use the models they've painstakingly converted and painted up over the years in their games of Horus Heresy. The intent, therefore, is good. The execution, however, is a dumpster fire. Just a quick note before we get into it, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience. So if you enjoyed the video, please hit those buttons down below. We've also recently affiliated with War Office Game Supplies. So if you live in the UK and you're looking to buy some Heresy or other Games Workshop miniatures online, check out our affiliate link in the description for some great savings and a chance to help out the channel. Now there's three things I want to cover in today's video. Firstly, what this Legacy document is, why Games Workshop has gone down this route and why it's important that this document exists. Secondly, why the Horus Heresy Legacy rules are rather disappointing. And thirdly, what do we do about it? So, first up, what is this document, why have we got it, and why is it important? GW have gone down the route of recent years of a policy of making sure they have miniatures for all of their rule sets. If a certain unit doesn't have an option as a miniature or doesn't have a way to create that miniature, they've generally cut those rules or cut those options from the rule set. Chaos Space Marines, great example. They've just released the new Chaos 40k Codex, and they cut the ability to give your Lord a jump pack because they simply didn't make a dedicated miniature for it. Now lots of people have converted that up, but unless there's a specific official GW miniature, those rules are being cut. So just keep that in mind. That's been happening across all of their systems. It's their go-to policy. Now, to maintain goodwill from the Heresy community, and to make sure players aren't being punished by Forge World's inability to design and develop miniatures for the many units they wrote rules for over the last 10 years, Games Workshop has decided to release a Legacies document. Honestly, they didn't have to do this. It's a sign of goodwill to the community. They communicated their intent right from the start, which is a nice change of pace for GW on how they were going to do this. So they get at least a half-hearted high five for their attempt to make sure no one is left with an army they can't play in this new edition. They've likely gone down this route for a number of reasons. Anything from publication limitations on the size of the new books, not wanting to overcomplicate the direction of the new edition, or not having enough time or resources to dedicate to a proper redesign of the Legacies units. This is why these units likely haven't been included in the official books we've seen released out of GW, and same again because they don't have miniatures, so they wanted to put a line in the sand and divide the two types of units. Those that do have miniatures and those that don't. It is what it is. So what exactly is a Legacies document? Well, it's kind of a formal rules document, and it's kind of not. By releasing PDF rules, much like they did when Age of Sigmar was released, they let the community continue to use their existing armies, but they also drew a line in the sand for what units they will and will not be supporting moving forwards. Similarly, in 40k they have their Legends document that covers units without miniatures and older miniatures that GW has chosen to retire. As I expect it will be with Horus Heresy, the 40k Legends units have not been touched since 2019, I believe since they were created, this Legends document. So, the mainstream units of the game in 40k see frequent updates, frequent balancing, much like I expect Heresy to in some way or another, whereas these Legends documents, and I believe the Heresy Legacies documents, will be created once and then left well alone. So yes, people can 100% use these Horus Heresy Legacies units, but their relevancy will continue to suffer as they likely don't see any support in the future. It will be interesting to see if some of these units get a formal release in future Heresy publications coming out from GW, or if GW is just going to avoid that complication and potential outrage that may cause by just avoiding these units moving forward, and if they want to bring a new unit to the tabletop, they just come up with something new and leave the Legacies units well alone. Interesting to see which way they go. Next up, I now want to discuss why I think these Horus Heresy Legacy rules are a bit disappointing. There's no easy way to put this. These Legacy rules are pretty average. The majority of these units are going to let you down on the tabletop. There's some fascinating internal balance decisions, leaving certain units underpowered compared to their main rulebook contemporaries, or otherwise significantly overcosted. The best example of this is probably the Attack Bike Squadron. This unit is just the worst. It sucks. We're talking laughably bad. It's very clear that almost no design principles or rigor of thought was applied to this unit, and quite a number of other units in this document as well. Many other units lost a bit of flavour from their first edition versions, they lost options or special rules. It just seems such a shame to release this document, but still leave the community disappointed. It almost would have been better for GW to leave these units alone and let the community come up with their own rules. I can, with quite some confidence, say that the Heresy community would have done a much better job with the majority of these units, and could have maintained a living document that achieved balance with the main rule system. Unfortunately, now that this Legacies document exists, it undermines any community effort that may have been attempted and accepted at non-GW events. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. Some units are certainly usable out of this Legacies document. Some, in fact, are potentially too good, which is an issue all on its own. Those Ultramarine units, in particular, are out of control, so it is a big win for the boys in blue. People have also noted how powerful the Legion Nullificator squads look, but with a limitation on only taking a single unit, I don't see any big issues there. Box Dreads, officially called Legion Castroferum Dreadnoughts, look very usable, which honestly is a lot of what people were going to use this document for, so that's a positive. Legion Terminator Indomitus squads are also pretty decent for some cheaper access to Power Fists, and while I'm not personally a huge fan of seeing Indomitus pattern Terminator armor in games of Horus Heresy, there's lore justification to it, so I'll leave it well alone. So, while there's a few bright sparks, the Legacies document as a whole is a bit of a dumpster fire. This document is very clearly an afterthought and is just not what the Heresy community needed this early into a new edition. I don't know if this is the result of laziness, a lack of priority, or an internal tension within GW to allocate design resources elsewhere. It's probably a combination of all three, but they didn't do a great job, and I'm a little disappointed about it, as I'm sure a lot of other players out there are. Now lastly, the most important part, what do we do as a community about this situation? There's a few courses of action the community could take in response to this Legacies debacle. I'm not here to say which one's the best, and I'm sure different communities will approach this issue in their own ways, which is entirely appropriate. Importantly, right off the bat, we have to treat this document with as much respect as any other rules published by GW. I know this kind of hurts, but it is what it is. If you're running a tournament or an event, it behoves you as the organizer to classify the units in this Legacies document as legal. In fact, it doesn't even need to be addressed in any event description or players pack. These rules are a GW publication and should be treated much like any other army book. However, the community has an opportunity to step in here and do something about GW's half-hearted attempt. Many of the units in this Legacies document have some pretty serious fan bases within the Heresy community, or are represented in many people's armies. If your Heresy community happens to have one particularly keen player who chooses to do a rebalance of some of these units, I'd honestly take a good look at it and consider it for more relaxed local events. In the end, the intent of the Legacies document should be to not only make sure people's armies are still functionally playable in the new edition, but to also make sure they perform on the table to a standard that doesn't leave players with a bitter taste in their mouths. If you go down this route, it's super important that all attendees to the event get the chance to see and understand this adjusted Legacies document in advance, to avoid any potential confusion or negative play experiences. Now, if it's just you and your mates, feel free to do whatever you want. Please do not feel constrained by this document and let it cast a shadow over your Heresy experience. I promise that, for most of the units in this Legacies document, your attempt to balance them and make them playable will be just as valid, if not more so, as GW's attempt. You could go with a points adjustment, especially for some of those super heavy units, to make them playable. You could look at using first edition rules for certain units if you feel they're better. Mostly with the simple addition of a movement value, they're pretty good to go. Feel empowered to adjust certain stats if it just seems obviously wrong. 2 wounds for an attack bike seems very reasonable, and I don't think any frequent opponent you play against is going to have any issues with it. All in all, stay flexible, people. It's your game, it's your heresy. Play it the way that makes you happy. And that brings us to the end of our heresy chats for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think of the Legacy rules and what units you would change, and how. Importantly, make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for heresy.